Hello everyone, how is it going? Today I am going to be talking about why it is important to try and build a long-term, sustainable, robust recovery. Okay, because remember that when you're on the recovery journey, you need to forget the idea of a short-term fix, of a quick fix, a quick solution. If you want to really have a stable mental health and a good, solid emotional health, a sturdy emotional health, that isn't quick. That's not quickly found. You don't just get that overnight. That's going to take persistence. It's going to take practice. It's going to take a lot of work. You've got to view it as like a marathon approach, a gradual process, rather than suddenly reading a sentence or hearing some words of wisdom and then it all clicks into place and off you go, living a merry life, being fully recovered and in a good place mentally. It doesn't quite work like that. And you must remember that when you're on the OCD recovery journey, the aim isn't just to feel better, it's to get better and to stay better. You want it to be sustainable, your recovery. You don't want to just get to a place where you're feeling okay, you're functioning at a decent level, but then you're just very up and down, very turbulent, very rocky. You don't want to be in that kind of situation. Of course, initially you will be, as you're putting in the work and as you're applying the tools and as you embark on the recovery journey, it will be bumpy. It will be an emotional roller coaster, we like to call it, where it is turbulent. It really is. But the long-term aim, as a coach, the long-term project is how do we here as the OCD recovery team, us coaches here, how do we get you better but keep you better so therefore you stay better? And this is where, the persistence comes into it and practice again and again and again and again and again. Because the problem is that what tends to happen, and I've seen this many times before for maybe mainstream advice, and although the advice is very well intentioned, it can often be just approaching the short-term fix. So you might feel better, for example, let's say you're given bundles of reassurance or tons of, avoid your fears and then you'll be okay, or avoid your triggers. Okay, you might get the temporary relief there, but you're not going to get better that way. If anything, you're going to get worse because you're trading the long-term, robust, resilient recovery, the stable recovery, just to what? Just to avoid something which you might get relief or just not as triggered in that moment, but then OCD builds momentum. You're just giving OCD power. You're allowing OCD to thrive. Okay, so in order to get to a solid place, we're going to have to face our fears, go towards the unconditional acceptance, and that's self-acceptance, that's other acceptance and life acceptance. That's changing our life philosophies, embodying different perspectives, looking at our fears from a scientific approach, breaking it down, seeing it from a very calm approach rather than the frantic, chaotic, looking for that quick fix to get results, looking for that quick fix to change a feeling. That's why I initially went wrong on my journey. I thought, and all I wanted was an alleviation of emotions, meaning that I wanted all the bad negative emotions gone and I wanted to feel happy, I wanted to feel content, I wanted to feel calm, I wanted that blissful state, I wanted just the peace, I wanted a default state of peace in my mind. But the problem was I was going about it all wrong because I was approaching it as like I was a car and I was going to get fixed by a mechanic. Here we go, have a few sessions, you've been fixed, there's the cure, get on with your life, forget about OCD, it never existed, get on with your life. No, you can't approach it like that. OCD is a very serious chronic disorder. It ain't gonna just go. I'd have to take your brain out, I'd have to cut your head open, take your brain out, put a new brain in, and off you go. Well, no, obviously we can't do that. So we've got to get used to life with having this brain and making changes to our behaviors, to our beliefs, to our life structure. I often call it we're deconstructing the internal framework that OCD is currently thriving upon, and that internal framework It's all the rigid thinking, the black and white thinking, the demands, the catastrophic thinking, the low frustration tolerance belief. I can't stand it, I can't bear this, I can't cope with that. How you're viewing the worst case scenario, the awfulizing, and the self-downing, the berating yourself endlessly, the self-punishment, the self-torturous cycle of I'm no good, I'm worthless, I'm evil, I'm written off now, I'm undeserving, I am unforgivable, all these things that we label ourselves with, and the unfairness, the undeserving side of things, all the beliefs that we hold in a very rigid fashion, we're deconstructing them, we're dissecting them, we're ripping them apart, you're tearing them to shreds. And you're also changing the compulsive behaviors, the avoidance, the reassurance seeking, the reassurance seeking, all the behaviors, the instant gratification behaviors, chasing relief, escapisms, all the behaviors that we indulge in when we're looking for that quick relief and that quick escape. Because all that does is just fuel that cycle, and it actually just allows OCD to build momentum and thrive. It builds power that way. I often say to people that I coach, I say, hey, we want to be turning the tide against OCD. When OCD's got momentum, we're riding that wave out. We're allowing OCD to have that momentum. We're riding it out. We're wearing the discomfort. We're resisting compulsions at all costs. And over time, we start gaining momentum ourselves. The tide begins to turn on OCD, and we think, right, hang on a moment. I want to build my momentum now. I want to get into good habits, healthy habits, good life structure, getting into a good routine, whether that's working, socializing, relationships, your career, exercise, whatever that may be. As you're chipping away at the tools, reading the books that we advise on the reading list, consistent written disputing work, facing your fears head on, doing targeted exposures set by your coach in one-to-one coaching calls, cutting these compulsions, really giving it your all. And over time, you start making some serious strides. And yes, there's wobbles along the way. Yes, there's setbacks. Yes, there's relapses. Yes, there's all kinds of external events and life stresses and outward happenings that can affect us for sure. We're trying to recover in a very hectic life that we all live. It's very hard dealing with a chronic disorder such as OCD when we're already, living in a world which is not only highly irrational, but also, it's hectic, it's chaotic, it's frantic out there. The world that's the way of the world, right? We can't hide away, we can't shy away from the world. We got to go out there and live. It's just an inconvenience to have a mental health disorder such as OCD, but we can't sit and cry, I'm afraid, guys. We can't sit and whine and whinge and play the victim. Nobody's saying OCD is easy. It's definitely not, and I know that firsthand from lived experience. OCD is the hardest thing that I've been through personally, and my biggest accomplishment ever to recover from OCD, for sure. It would take something massive to trump that. But you got to view it as, well, this is the hand I've been dealt, I'm afraid. We got to deal with it. That like I said, OCD, we got to deal with that. We got to live with it. We got to learn to overcome it rather than wishing it wasn't there, rather than spending your whole time trying to get rid of it. This is the brain that we've got, so we've got to learn to adjust, adapt, pivot, be versatile towards all of life happenings, all of life's frustrations, adversities, whilst dealing with OCD and looking at our particular core fears, looking at what OCD is latching to. Remember, OCD is going after that thing that we are yet to accept in an unconditional manner. It's targeting that, it's latching firmly, it's gripping on. For me, for example, it was going after anything where, if you've done this, Sam, your life's written off and your life's over and you can never live with yourself and you can never be at peace with yourself ever again, and all the enjoyment now is gone and you've ruined your life. And, it's looking to target any mistake where I may have done wrong. It's looking to put the future into jeopardy, where the future is now ruined because this thing in the past, or the taboo, immoral, intrusive thoughts. And it was targeting health fears and then targeting any kind of thing where I may have done wrong. That's just my personal story with OCD, and I really suffered with those kind of themes and those fears. So I had to really break those down consistently on paper. And I often ask people this: when people are demotivated and deflated and quite dejected, which you will be, because it's a relentless disorder, OCD. It's just resilient. It doesn't just back down overnight. It doesn't budge easily. This isn't a coffee, by the way. This is a cup of tea with a corgi mug. As you all know, I have a Welsh Pembrokeshire corgi as my pet. So I got a mug with a corgi on it. And I often tell people this, and when they say, Sam, I'm really struggling with demotivation. I want to get better, and I don't just want to feel better. I want to stay better. I want to build the robust, recovered state. How do I get there? And I just can't find the discipline for it. And I say, hey, think of it like this. Is there any greater reward than mastering your own emotional health? Is there any greater reward than that? To being in control of your own emotional destiny, being in charge of your own emotional fate. There's no better feeling than having that mental freedom, so you're not chained by the shackles of fear. You're not locked in that fear cycle no longer. You're no longer hidden behind fear. You're no longer living in the mental prison. You're liberated from that mental prison. You're no longer feeling trapped. You're no longer feeling stuck and boxed in a corner where you feel like there's no way out. You're no longer feeling broken. Yes, you're accepting having OCD, a serious mental health disorder, but because beliefs have shifted and you have the unconditional self-acceptance, with time, as we keep applying these tools, the consistent work, as you're learning in one-to-one calls, the reading, facing your fears head on. On this video, I can't give like a plan for you in particular watching this video. Of course, we break this down in one-to-one calls. That's what we do. I'm not trying to make this a sales pitch for you, but it would be possible for me to say, hey, you do this, you do that, you do this, because each case is a case-by-case basis. We'll have different, things going on around us, external events happening. We have different fears, different ways of OCD latching. Yes, OCD is very similar in a way because it's targeting what we fear, but it goes after different ways. It's very nuanced. It's very complex in how it latches to things. Okay, so this is why it's important that you have that tailor-made, specialized approach towards your particular OCD fears, and we can help break that down. If you email phil@ocdrecovery.com, and there's also the WhatsApp number in the description of this video, we can get in touch with Phil, get booked in for some sessions. My name's Sam, by the way, and we have Rob, Nick, Momin, Elliot and Gemma all doing coaching calls. You can get in touch with us and we can start your recovery journey today. Or maybe kickstart your recovery journey. Maybe you came in for some calls and maybe you haven't had a call for maybe a couple of months or even years or whatever it may be. We can certainly kickstart your recovery journey, because the aim is to have that robust approach towards life. You often hear us say the recovery tools, as in the OCD recovery tools, isn't just for OCD and that's it. They're tools for life. I deal with life's adversities and life's hardships much more efficiently now, much more productively, much more effectively now because of my suffering, because of the blessing of the suffering. When I was in the midst of suffering, there's no way I was calling it a blessing. But now looking back, I was thinking, fuck me, I'm so glad that I suffered from a serious disorder, because it's taught me so much, and it's taught me that any irrationality on my side, then I have a brain that's going to thrive off that. So I want to be going towards the rational alternative and the scientific approach, and breaking things down and seeing through the barrier of fear. Going through the illusion of fear, rather than just living in a compulsive cycle and avoidance and being super rigid and black and white and all or nothing in my ways of thinking. It wouldn't get me very far. It wasn't productive for me. Plus it was blocking my goals, it was blocking my desires, it was blocking my life objectives, shall we say. So the tools that you learn are for life. They really help you deal with problems in not only an efficient way, but like in a long-term, very calm way, addressing the problem, overcoming, seeing obstacles as an opportunity, seeing it as a chance to propel yourself to the next level, shall we say, almost unlock the next door. When I go through life adversities now, I go through loads of hassles, loads of problems. We're human beings, right? We're living life, and in this hectic world. So it's going to be many problems. So you want to be best equipped for that. And there's no best teacher. There's no better teacher. There's no better lecturer than OCD. OCD is very strict. The strictest teacher that there could be out there. But it's an excellent teacher, because it certainly keeps you in line with, if you're sort of veering off into the irrational, if you're veering off into maybe sort of the anger and just the victimizing. OCD is there to sort of correct you and realign you. So try and see it as a blessing. Look, guys, I know when you're suffering, if you're watching this video, you're thinking, Sam, how the hell can I see this as a blessing? You know, I'm just keeping my head above water here. You know, I'm stopping myself from drowning. It's easy to think, what the hell are you talking about, Sam? Like, how can this be a blessing? But trust me, as we start building momentum, as we start making progress, as we start to gather pace, we start seeing it as a huge blessing in disguise, because it's teaching us so much. And, you know, OCD is a great teacher in life of how we can change philosophies, life philosophies, you know, having the unconditional self-acceptance, dealing with our own personal mistakes and our own personal fallibilities and our own personal imperfections, our flaws, our shortcomings, all where we can go wrong. We move on very quickly because we learn to accept ourselves unconditionally, whilst condemning bad behavior or whilst disliking mistakes and you know, rating poor behavior and poor actions from yourself, but ultimately looking to overcome, you know, and not repeat the same mistake to therefore better yourself in the future and better your actions. And you do that from an unconditional acceptance. You accept yourself even with your mistakes, but trying to improve. You know, that's not just excusing any behavior, just not and acting recklessly and acting carelessly. You know, it's definitely not that at all. You know, you can condemn poor actions from yourself, but looking to overcome, moving on. If you hate yourself, if you're berating yourself, if you're neglecting yourself, you're going to get bogged down by so many damaging emotions such as depression, anxiety, guilt, shame, panic, low mood, deflation, you know, demotivation. Is going to just hinder you on this miraculous life that we're here. You know, it's miraculous that we're even here, right? This is a precious life, and you know, you're not guaranteed tomorrow. So you've got to really think, how do I make the most of my life today? And that does not come about by beating yourself up and living in chronic guilt and shame. And you really can get there. Okay, you really can make progress. But the aim with us, what we do here, we're not looking just to immediately make you feel better, because that's the reassurance route, and that doesn't work. That's just total short term. We're looking at the long-term marathon approach. How do we build that sustainable, long-term, robust recovery? The key word there being sustainable. You want to sustain your progress. You don't want to just feel good for a couple of minutes or a couple of days or a week, whatever. You want to have that long-term stability with your mental health, because there's no greater reward than having that mental freedom. Because even if you're, let's say you're in good financial shape and good physical shape, if your mental health's in a faulty shape and not in a great way, you're going to really struggle to enjoy your finances. You're going to really struggle to enjoy your physical health and your relationship, aren't you? So it's really important that we're prioritizing our mental health and getting ourselves to a good position so we can really go out there and embrace life and go out there and give it our all and be present and really live in the moment and enjoy life and have a laugh along the way. But, you know, trying to achieve our goals and our desires and, you know, the objectives that we set for ourselves, but ultimately having a good time along the way, having a laugh, you know, meeting great people, as in good friends and good friendships, good companionships, meeting partners, getting into relationships, having a good career, an enjoyable career, really pushing yourself, you know, really spurring yourself on to go out there and, you know, achieve some kind of fitness goal, go and, you know, run a marathon, as just I'm giving a random example, go and travel the world or whatever it may be. Getting out there and building a life that you want, building that life that you want to look back on and be proud of and think, yeah, I really went for it. And not saying, oh, I put everything off because I didn't want to give up reassurance. I was desperate for that quick short-term relief. I actually put off the long-term change. It's hard to see the long-term change when we're fixated and when we're glued in the suffering, because we're, you know, it's so intense. I'm fully aware of that from lived experience. It's so intense. It's hard to see the long-term plan at times. But always think, do not trade that long-term robust recovery just for the short-term 5 minutes of temporary relief. It just isn't worth it. You know, you're getting scammed, you're getting mocked each time by OCD. OCD's making an absolute mockery of you. It's conning you. It's a genius in the scamming department. It's a genius. You know, it will say, oh, do this. If you do this compulsion, then you'll get relief, and then it will justify the compulsion, and it feel like, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. You know, I'm getting relief, and that avoidance is good, and that seeking reassurance is good, and that confessing is good, and that mental solving is good. But you're getting scammed. OCD locks in. It moves the goalpost, and round we go again. And OCD is just towing you along to nowhere. You're not going to get anywhere in the long run. Okay, so as we start building this long-term sustainable recovery, it will require heaps of discomfort. It will require some difficult moments, some turbulent periods of time, confusion, lost, feeling hopeless, feeling like you're not going anywhere. But here, the coaches here, we're here to guide you. We're here to guide you all the way. We've been there ourselves. We're just guiding you through the steps that we've taken on our journey to get you to that long-term, robust recovery, which is so worth it. It really is. If you can get to a place where you are in charge of your mental health, you control your emotional destiny, you're mastering your own emotional well-being, there's no better feeling than that. So we want to be striving towards that, and that doesn't come by quick short-term reassurance. That comes by making change in the now and viewing it as like a lifelong project. Okay, this suffering now is intense, but how can I change my perspectives here? How can I change my views on this? How can I change my outlook here? How can I change my habit here? How can I cut the procrastination here? How can I better my habits here? How can I change my structure here? How can I change this to get me to where I want to be in the long run? That's going to require discomfort, but we're backing you every step of the way for our own personal lived experience. Guys, it's been great speaking to you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please leave a like. That is much appreciated. If you're interested in one-to-one sessions, please email phil@ocdrecovery.com or message the WhatsApp number in the description of this video. Guys, look after yourself. It's been great speaking to you all as usual. You take care, and we will speak again. Bye-bye.